Hi, my name is Alex LeMan. Welcome to Shadow Whispers, where silence speaks and the dark remembers. This is a place for those who don't just want to hear horror, but to feel it settle under the skin. Here, the fear isn't loud, it lingers, it waits. Some stories are true, some never should be, but all of them leave a mark, so turn down the lights, trust no sound, and let's begin. Roseglass Storm. Chapter 1. Camellias in Snow. "Miss Ellaway, you'll slip," the head groom shouted as Margaret's boots skidded across the frost-silvered flagstones, but she ignored him and ducked into the swirling whiteness. Snow almost never touched Bellehaven, Georgia, yet the sky had emptied its feathers overnight, covering the lawns in a hush that felt like permission to misbehave. She dragged her cape tighter and hurried toward the glass house, heartbeat drumming louder than the sleet against the panes. Inside, moist air fogged her spectacles. A sudden movement startled her. The silhouette of a man on a ladder, shoulders dusted with plaster. James Carter froze, chisel in hand, as though caught stealing secrets. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low enough to stir the leaves of the camellias blooming blood-red behind him. "Your father ordered the frames inspected, not visited." "And yet you're here," she answered, striking a balance between defiance and curiosity. Her cheeks burned from the dash, her mind from the thought of being caught alone with him. James climbed down, boots hitting the soil with a soft thud. Light leaked through cracked panes, painting shards of gold across his jaw. Margaret forced herself to breathe evenly. Women of her circle did not admire the lines of a worker's hands, yet hers traced them in imagination, each callous a daring sentence. He gestured toward a cluster of petals lying on the ground. "These fell in the night. Camellias aren't built for cold snaps." "Neither am I, apparently," she murmured, teeth chattering. "But I couldn't stay indoors. The house is stuffed with cousins and expectations." She gave him a sideways glance. "Did you ever wish to hammer your way out of a cage, Mr. Carter?" "My cage?" He laughed once, quietly. "I build cages for a living, Miss Ellaway. Libraries, verandas, greenhouses. Freedom means measuring twice and praying wood prices don't rise." A gust rattled the roof. Flakes settled on the glass like unanswered letters. She caught his gaze, felt the weight of it, and for an instant the camellias seemed to lean closer, eavesdropping. "Margaret," a crisp voice called from outside. Her mother. Panic pricked her throat. Society dictated she exit now, skirts unrumpled, dignity intact. Instead, she whispered, "Meet me here tomorrow at dawn. I want to know why a man who builds cages still believes in flowers." James bowed, confusion shading into intrigue. "If the snow hasn't buried us first." She slipped out, pulse racing. Footprints stitched a guilty path across the lawn, and the winter air tasted of secrets still hot on her tongue. That evening, the parlor smelled of wet wool and scandal. Relatives lounged near the fire, trading rumors about telephone lines and President Roosevelt's latest speech. Margaret poured coffee, hands steady only by force. Across the room, her fiancé-in-waiting, Edwin Rawls, a banker with perfect partings and no imagination, spoke of railway mergers. If he noticed the smear of soil at her hem, he said nothing. Her sister Lydia leaned in. "Why were you racing around in that blizzard?" "Looking for quiet," Margaret lied. "Then you found the wrong place." Lydia's gaze flicked toward Edwin, who smiled like a ledger balanced to the penny. Upstairs, Margaret opened her window despite the chill. Moonlight limned the garden. The greenhouse gleamed like a lantern. Did James still pace under its dome, dreaming in blueprint blue? She pressed a palm to the sill, astonished by the ache that bloomed there. She imagined tomorrow, dawn, breath clouding, confession blooming faster than any winter rose. But dawn also meant risk. Her father's wrath, Edwin's wounded pride, the gossip columns Lydia devoured at breakfast. Could she let one impulsive meeting ignite a blaze big enough to consume Bellehaven's careful order? Snow kept falling, erasing boundaries between paths, beds, and secrets. In that white silence, Margaret heard her own heart pose a reckless question. What if love was worth the scandal? She left the window unlatched, as if inviting the storm to decide. Chapter 2. Past the rose-tinted glass. Margaret slipped from the mansion before first light, her boots crunching thin ice that crusted the garden paths. A single lamp glowed inside the greenhouse, painting the panes with a shy blush. She pushed the door, heart thudding louder than the squeal of the hinges, and found James kneeling by a cracked sill, soldering iron-spitting blue sparks. "You're early," he said without looking up. "You're bleeding," she replied, noticing a bead of red on his knuckle. He wiped it on his sleeve, as unbothered as if she had commented on the weather. The frame warped in the cold. "I'm replacing it with rose glass. Stronger, kinder to the buds." Step back. A shard snapped, sparks hissed. The scent of hot metal curled through the humid air. Margaret obeyed, but kept her gaze fixed on him. Pale dawn seeped through the new panel, throwing a pink wash across his face and hers. For a breath, it felt like they stood inside a secret sunset no one else could see. "Why rose?" she asked, half to stall the racing of her pulse. "Because ordinary glass lies," he said. "It steals warmth, turns blooms brittle. Rose glass tells the truth about color." She almost replied that truth was overrated in Bellehaven, but footsteps outside silenced her. Edwin Rawle's voice sliced through the hush. "Miss Ellaway, are you in there? Your mother is frantic." Panic surged. If Edwin found her alone with James at dawn, her reputation would snap like that pain. She darted behind a camellia bush. Petals shivered, showering her hair with crimson confetti. James straightened calmly and opened the door before Edwin could. The banker's immaculate mustache twitched at the sight of work-stained overalls. "I heard hammering," Edwin said, nose wrinkling. "Why at this hour?" "Because the structure was failing," James answered. "Rot works nights, sir." Margaret held her breath. Edwin peered past James, glimpsed the soft glow, then shrugged. "Miss Ellaway must have returned to the house," he added, almost to himself. "She has been restless lately." When his footsteps faded, Margaret emerged, cheeks aflame. "He'll suspect." "Let him," James said. "Truth shows through, eventually, like dawn through rose glass." A thrill of dread and delight skittered across her nerves. She braced a hand on the work table to steady herself, and noticed a rolled blueprint weighted by a wrench. It showed the greenhouse walls blown open, merging into a wide conservatory with walking paths, benches, even a hidden reading alcove. "You planned this?" she whispered. "For you," he admitted. "I saw how you look at these flowers, as if they're prisoners. I want them, and you, to breathe." Emotion throbbed in her throat, too raw for speech. She traced the inked lines with trembling fingers, then flinched at a sudden knock. Lydia poked her head in, eyes wide. "Meg, Mother's hysterical. Edwin said you vanished into the storm like a tragic poem." "Oh." She spotted James, then the blueprint, and her curiosity flared brighter than any lantern. "Well, this is interesting." "Say nothing," Margaret begged. Lydia stepped inside, closing the door. "That depends. I've always wanted a sisterly secret worth keeping." She touched the rose glass and pink light dusted her freckles. "Beautiful. Does Father know you're redesigning his property?" "Not yet," James replied, unfazed. Then Bellehaven might explode before spring. Lydia grinned, the prospect clearly thrilling her. Meg, hurry! Service in town begins in an hour. If you return drenched in scandal, at least arrive on time for hymns. Margaret squeezed James's hand once, swift, electric, and followed Lydia into the whitening garden. Behind her, the greenhouse glimmered, a heart pulsing under crystal ribs. Church pews creaked as Bellehaven's gentry knelt, but Margaret's prayer book trembled in her grasp. Edwin sat beside her, polite concern masking suspicion. At the sermon's midpoint, a messenger slipped through the nave and handed her father a telegram. His jaw tightened. The pew shook with the force of his grip. After the benediction, he gathered the family in a side chapel, voice pitched low. Our holdings in Florida suffered heavy flood damage. The creditors grow nervous. His gaze landed on Margaret, then on Edwin. We may require strategic alliances sooner than planned. Edwin touched her elbow possessively. Lydia met Margaret's eyes, understanding passing between them like a silent pact. The cage was closing faster than anyone guessed. Outside, sleet had turned to rain. Rose-tinted runoff dripped from stained glass saints, streaking the stone like tears. Margaret lifted her face to the chill and thought of camellias breathing beneath a dome of rebellious pink, and of a man who believed ordinary glass lied. In that moment, she knew no alliance forged in fear could rival the fragile, dangerous truth waiting beyond respectable walls. A carriage door slammed. Edwin called her name. Margaret hesitated, then stepped toward him, only far enough to keep appearances intact. Behind her, thunder cracked, echoing down the muddy street like fate clearing its throat. She wondered which roof she would stand under when the next storm arrived, and whether rose glass could hold against the coming gale. Chapter 3. Ball without promises. Rain stopped an hour before Bellehaven's winter cotillion, leaving pearls of water clinging to the live oak branches like silent gossip. Inside the ballroom, gaslight flared, chandeliers hissed, and a string quartet tuned with nervous twangs that echoed Margaret's pulse. Her father had ordered this fete to dazzle creditors and nudge Edwin Rawls toward a public proposal. Every bouquet, every candelabrum screamed salvation disguised as elegance. Margaret's lilac silk rustled like whispered protest as she descended the staircase. Lydia waited near the banister, eyes bright with conspiracy. "He's here," she breathed. "He who?" Margaret asked, though her chest already tightened with recognition. "Your cage breaker." Lydia flicked her fan toward the servants' corridor. Mother caught him surveying the roof after the storm. Of course, Father bribed him to stay invisible during the dancing, but you know, Carter, he folds for no one. Margaret's gaze swept the crowd. Financiers in tailcoats compared cufflinks. Debutantes fluttered like captive swans. She spotted James near a service store, jacket brushed yet unmistakably out of rank. He met her eyes only a second, yet the room seemed to tilt, violin strings stretching thin around that glance. Edwin intercepted her. "Miss Ellaway, may I claim the first waltz?" His smile carried both affection and calculation. Before she answered, her father's hand pressed her shoulder, a silent command. She nodded, though her heart beat to another rhythm entirely. The orchestra launched into a confident Strauss. Edwin guided her through precise turns, but his words failed to keep pace. "About our future," he began, then paused when a murmur rippled across the hall. Rainwater had seeped through an old cornice, drops now pattered onto polished parquet. Servants scrambled with towels. Guests gasped, half amused, half horrified. James strode forward, assessing the leak. Gutter seal gave way. he announced to no one in particular, voice steady. Needs quick patching before the floor warps. Edwin bristled. This is hardly the time, Carter. It becomes the time when your partner's shoes are about to float away, James replied, eyes flicking to Margaret's slippers. Laughter flickered among the younger guests. Edwin's jaw locked. Margaret seized the distraction. Mr. Carter, perhaps you'll allow me to show you the attic stair? You'll need access, won't you? She didn't wait for permission. The crowd parted, Scandal's red carpet. Up the narrow steps they climbed, breaths mingling in the dusky corridor. Rain drummed the slate above. Lamplight trembled. At the attic door, Margaret halted, skirts quivering. You shouldn't have come, she whispered. You summoned me the moment you looked miserable in another man's arms, he answered. That man might secure my family's future. And trap yours. He brushed damp hair from her temple. Rose glass, remember, no lies. She wanted to yield, yet duty clawed. If Edwin proposes tonight, I must accept. Then let me give you something to refuse him with. He kissed her, swift, fierce, tasting of danger and midnight rain. When he pulled back, she swayed, unsure whether the roof or her resolve had cracked louder. A burst of voices echoed from below. Lydia's shout carried, Meg, father is searching. Margaret stepped away, panic flooding. Go, she pleaded. If he finds you here, he'll dismiss you and blacklist you across the county. James pressed a folded sheet into her palm. Blueprints for your freedom. Show them to your father. Tell him the greenhouse can double revenue with citrus sales. He needs profit more than pedigree. Use that truth. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. James vanished into attic shadows while Lydia appeared, cheeks flushed. Father thinks Edwin is proposing in the study. You have 3 minutes to look radiant or ruinous. Back downstairs, candlelight glared harshly. Edwin waited before the hearth, ring box gleaming in his hand. The room hushed. Margaret's father stood beside him, hope and desperation naked on his face. Margaret felt the weight of the blueprint against her palm, the taste of forbidden rain on her lips, and the gaze of 100 hungry eyes. She stepped forward, uncertainty blazing brighter than the chandeliers, and realized the entire future of Bellehaven balanced on the next sentence she dared to utter. Chapter 4. When the walls gave way. Silence pricked every ear as Margaret faced the ballroom. She could feel Edwin's anticipation, her father's pleading stare, the creditor's thinly veiled hunger for good news. She lifted the folded blueprint instead of her hand for the ring. Before any promises are made, she began, voice steady, I must show you something that can save Bellehaven without tying me to a man I do not love. Gasps scattered like startled birds. Edwin's smile calcified. This is highly irregular. So is drowning a plantation in debt, she answered, unfolding the paper on a side table. James Carter calculated that a redesigned conservatory could triple our income by winter citrus alone. She tapped numbers inked along the margins. Investors prefer profit to dowries. Her father's face flushed the shade of collapsing sunset. You disgrace us before the whole county. Better a moment's disgrace than a lifetime, she said, then softened. Please look at the figures. Before anyone moved, thunder boomed overhead. The crystal chandeliers chimed like alarm bells. Cracks snaked across the vaulted plaster. A second rumble, closer, and a chunk of molding crashed onto the parquet where a row of dowagers had been gossiping seconds earlier. Screams erupted. Rain from the leaky cornice had weakened the ceiling all afternoon. Now the ballroom itself threatened to crumble. The quartet abandoned their instruments. Guests surged toward the exits. silks catching on splintered chair legs. Edwin tried to seize Margaret's arm, but she twisted free, eyes searching for James. He vaulted a banister, shouting orders to footmen. "Clear the center! Everyone under the arches!" Margaret's father froze, paralyzed by the sight of his ancestral home tearing open along the rafter seams. A jagged beam groaned overhead. Margaret ran to him, shoved, and rolled them both beneath an arch just as plaster rained down like shattered bone. Dust smothered her lungs. The chandelier smashed against the floor in a spray of glass and gas flame. Someone shrieked fire. James slipped through chaos, hauling a canvas tarp from the storeroom. He smothered the flames while servants doused smoking embers with pitchers of sweet tea, whatever liquid they could reach. When the last spark hissed out, the ballroom lay half in ruins, air gritty with lime and fear. Outside, lightning stitched the sky purple. Inside, the crowd trembled, their fine clothes powdered white. Edwin staggered up, eyeing James with raw resentment. "Your faulty repairs caused this." James wiped soot from his brow. "The damage began years before I arrived. Shortcuts, cheap materials, every corner cut to impress creditors like you." Margaret's father gathered his wits. "Mr. Carter, is her greenhouse plan truly viable?" "It's Bellehaven's best chance," James replied, voice low but ringing. "And cheaper to build than restoring your ballroom ceiling twice." All eyes swung back to Margaret. Rain pattered through the ragged hole above, dampening her hair but sharpening her resolve. "Father, let me oversee the conservatory. If I fail, I will marry whomever you choose. If I succeed, I'll chart my own life." The old colonel studied his shattered chandelier, the scorched parquet, the creditors whispering by the ruined buffet. At last he nodded once, an admission of both defeat and hope. "You have 6 months, Margaret." Edwin stepped forward, jaw clenched. "And what of our understanding? There was never understanding," she said gently. "Only expectation." She offered her hand in farewell. He turned away, face like carved ice, and stalked from the ruins. Guests dispersed into the storm. Coaches splashing through puddles that smelled of wet ash and gardenias. Inside, servants dragged couches to catch dripping water. James and Margaret stood amid fallen plaster, hearts hammering in synchronous relief and terror. He brushed a shard from her shoulder. "You just set dynamite to every rule in Bellehaven." "Rules crumble easier than ceilings," she murmured, trembling half from cold, half from exhilaration. "Will you help me rebuild?" "Only if you promise the walls will have windows wide enough for freedom." She laughed, ragged and luminous, like dawn after a hurricane. "Windows of rose glass," she said, and for the first time the future felt as solid as the earth beneath their unsteady feet. Chapter 5. Greenhouse in Flames. March fog rolled over Bellehaven like spilled milk, muffling the hammer ring of workers raising the new conservatory frame. Margaret paced the perimeter with James's drawings clutched against her coat, inspecting every joint, every rivet, every promise to her family and to herself. The structure already arched higher than the ruined ballroom ceiling, ribbed steel, wide skylights, walls waiting for rose glass. It smelled of cut cedar and possibility. That evening, Lydia burst into Margaret's room, cheeks flushed. "Edwin is back. He arrived with Mr. Langford, the creditor. They're drinking brandy with father and muttering about foreclosures if citrus trees don't flower on schedule." Margaret's pulse kicked. "They think I'll fail. They want the land." "Or want you frightened enough to marry," Lydia said. "Watch your back, Meg." Midnight found Margaret still awake, lantern guttering beside a stack of invoices. Wind rattled shutters like impatient knuckles. She decided on a final walk to the site, craving fresh air or courage. A half-moon silvered the lawn. Magnolias seethed in the breeze. She smelled smoke before she saw it. At first, a faint sting, then a ribbon of black twisting through the skeletal rafters. Flames licked tarp-covered timber. Embers scattered like fireflies. She sprinted, skirts tangling. "James!" she shouted into the dark. No answer, only the crack of resinous pine igniting. She seized a water barrel, doused a corner beam, but heat slapped her back. Glass panes, stacked nearby, exploded with pistol-sharp pops. Hoofbeats thundered up the drive. James vaulted from his horse, hair wild, shirt open at the throat. He grabbed a shovel, flung sand onto the blaze. Together, they battled the fire, coughing, eyes streaming. Sparks whirled around them, frantic orange snow. A burning plank collapsed, pinning James's ankle. Margaret shoved against the timber, muscles screaming. He gritted out, "Leave me, roof's going." "Not again," she answered, voice ragged. One final shove freed him. They stumbled clear as the south wall sagged inward with a roar. Flames roared higher, painting the plantation house blood red. Servants and farmhands arrived with buckets, forming a line from the pump. Colonel Ellaway, coat thrown over night clothes, barked orders, his drilled voice slicing through panic. Edwin and Langford hovered near the porch, silhouettes lit by the inferno. Edwin's expression flickered between horror and some darker satisfaction. By dawn, the fire lay smoldering, reduced to a blackened skeleton and puddles of cracked glass. Ash drifted over camellia bushes like gray snow. Margaret knelt beside the ruin, soot streaking her gown, tears carving clean tracks on her cheeks. James crouched, ankle bandaged, eyes hollow. "Someone doused the tarpaulin with lamp oil," he said. "Wind couldn't have carried that." Her gaze shot to Edwin, who spoke urgently to Langford, both glancing their way. Before she could move, her father limped over, face ashen but resolute. He laid a hand on her shoulder. "A house can be rebuilt. A daughter's spirit, once broken, cannot. Tell me what you need." "I need another loan for steel and glass," she answered, voice steady despite tremors. "And I need James as partner, not employee, his name on every contract." The colonel's gaze shifted to James, taking in blistered skin, torn sleeve, unwavering eyes. He nodded once. "Done." Edwin strode forward. "Ellaway, you're mad to throw more money into ashes. Our agreement was never signed," the colonel cut in. "Bellehaven stands on new terms now." He turned to Langford. "Extend credit or watch citrus profits go to rival orchards upstate. My daughter will finish what she started." Langford, eyeing the crowd of loyal workers and glowing embers, muttered, "We'll discuss terms tomorrow." Edwin's lips thinned. He tipped his hat to Margaret. "This isn't the end." Then he mounted his carriage and vanished into the smoky dawn. When only quiet remained, James brushed soot from Margaret's fingers. "I'm sorry I couldn't save it." "You saved me," she said, clasping his hand. Morning light seeped over the horizon, pink as the glass she still dreamed of. "And we will rise from this, together." He drew a shaky breath that tasted of smoke and hope. Then let the whole county watch. In the distance, chimney swifts circled the scorched frame, already scouting for new nests. Margaret straightened, shoulders aching but unbowed, and imagined citrus trees glowing like lanterns beneath a roof rebuilt stronger than before, walls that would dare the world to question her worth. The ashes at her feet felt less like ruin and more like soil, ready for the first brave seeds of spring. Chapter 6. Beyond Polite Walls. Summer steamed across Bellehaven 3 months after the fire, and the new conservatory rose like a ship of glass at the edge of the rice marsh. Sheets of rose-tinted panes slid into place with a resonant click that seemed to echo inside Margaret's ribs. By noon, the final panel settled, sealing the structure. Workers cheered. James only exhaled, as though he had been holding that breath since the night flames tried to steal their future. A black car rumbled up the drive, wheels spitting gravel. Edwin stepped out in a cream suit far too cool for Georgia heat, followed by Langford and two stern men in banker gray. Margaret stiffened. James wiped sweat from his brow and met her gaze. "Ready? Ready stopped mattering weeks ago," she said, then smiled because it was finally true. Edwin surveyed the glittering dome, jaw tight. "Lovely bauble," he called. "But will it pay before your debts mature?" "We harvest early varieties," James answered. "First shipment leaves next week. Orange blossoms are already setting fruit." Langford frowned. "We came to inspect collateral, not admire architecture." Margaret produced ledgers, each page notarized. "Collateral blooms," she said. "Smell for yourselves." She led them inside. Heat and citrus perfume wrapped around them like a daring embrace. Rows of potted satsumas glowed green under the rose glass, and honeybees drifted through open vents. A groan of metal sounded overhead. Edwin glanced up, instinctively flinching. James tapped a beam. Expanded steel, triple riveted. Even greed can't bend it. Margaret caught Edwin's eye. "Fear burned down my first dream. I won't let it scorch the second." He opened his mouth, but Langford interrupted, sniffing a blossom. "If these figures hold, Bellehaven's debt is secure. My board will be satisfied." Edwin's gaze darted to Margaret, softer now, almost regretful. "You won, then." "I didn't want to win," she said. "I wanted choice." He nodded once, as though accepting terms of surrender, and followed the bankers out. When the car disappeared beyond willow trees, the air felt suddenly wide. That night, lanterns shimmered along the conservatory path. Lydia strung white bunting, and Colonel Ellaway, cane forgotten, walked the aisle between citrus rows like a general inspecting troops. Neighbors gathered, gossip thick with surprise and admiration. James found Margaret beneath a bloom-heavy branch. Candlelight scattered gold across her hair. "Your father asked why I haven't proposed," he murmured. Her breath hitched. "And you said?" "That I would, but only in a place with no walls but the sky." He guided her through a side door onto the roof terrace he'd hidden from everyone but her. Evening spread violet over the marsh. Fireflies shimmered below like sparks waiting to rise. The dome beneath their feet glowed soft rose, holding their reflections inside its curve. James knelt, producing a ring hammered from greenhouse offcuts, copper and silver braided like vine and trellis. "I built this from ruins," he said, voice rough. "Will you wear it into whatever we build next?" Margaret's answer spilled out before thought. "Only if you promise. Leaves will grow wild where they choose." "On one condition," he replied, slipping the ring on her soot-scarred finger. "You'll teach me which wild things deserve pruning and which deserve freedom." Footsteps approached. The colonel, slower now, but steady. He cleared his throat. "If this is where courtesy ends," he said, scanning the open roof and endless night, "I suppose decent parents must learn to breathe higher air." Then he extended his hand to James with a half-smile that trembled like new glass. Below, music drifted from a single violin, Lydia coaxing waltz notes meant for a ballroom long gone. Margaret drew James into the first slow turn. Their shadows moved across rose panels, mingling with the silhouettes of orange leaves. Wind carried salt from the river. mingling with citrus and lantern smoke, scent of beginnings. Far off, thunder rolled, gentle this time, a promise of rain, not ruin. Under that growl, Bellehaven's new walls, born of steel and scandal, held firm. Margaret rested her cheek against James's shoulder, listening to the echo of their joined heartbeats, louder than society's chatter, softer than blossom fall. In the space where polite ceilings once pressed low, stars arched wide, and the future stretched past every boundary she had ever been taught to fear. Chapter 7. Storm of Blossoms. A week before the first citrus crates were set to leave Bellehaven, a wind unlike any Margaret had known clawed in from the Gulf. Dawn revealed sand-colored clouds boiling over the marsh, palmettos bending like supplicants before an invisible god. James watched barometers drop, his jaw locked. The colonel paced the veranda, counting lightning strikes. If the new conservatory lost a single pane, their fragile crop, and every promise tied to it, would rot overnight. By mid-morning, telegraph wires sang bad news from Savannah. A surprise tropical cyclone veered north, landfall expected by dusk. Margaret helped the workers lash canvas over roof vents while bees fled in frantic spirals, their hum drowned by rising gusts. She met James at the center aisle, hair whipping like a surrendered flag. "We have two choices," he said, pressing blueprints flat against a crate. "Vent the heat so glass won't implode, or seal everything and pray the frame holds." "Choose wrong," she answered, "and we lose the crop or the building." He brushed rain from her cheek. "Then we split the risk. Western windows open, eastern ones locked. If the wind shifts, we still breathe." They raced along opposite walls, cranking iron levers. Citrus leaves rattled like coins. Unripe oranges thumped onto soil. Outside, Lydia and half the county's field hands dug trenches to divert floodwater from foundations. The colonel barked orders until thunder swallowed his voice. At the storm's first howl of true fury, Edwin's roadster skidded into the yard. He leapt out, hat already gone to the gale. "Your telegraph reached me," he shouted to Margaret. "Langford's board will void your note if you fail to ship on time. I brought extra canvas, let me help." The offer glittered with old pride and some new, uneasy respect. James stiffened but nodded. Crisis was larger than rivalry. Together the men climbed the exterior lattice, driving stakes through snapping tarps while rain hammered like bullets. Wind slammed Edwin sideways. James caught his arm, anchoring him with a length of rope. Lightning forked, turning the conservatory rose and ghostly white by turns. Inside, steam from saturated heat fogged the panes. Margaret ran numbers in her head: cargo deadlines, barometric pressure, the rate at which love could outrun fear. When a deafening crack split the air, she spun to see the northern brace beam shear loose. Steel screamed, glass spiderwebbed above a line of satsuma trees heavy with nearly ripe fruit. She sprinted up the catwalk, skirts soaked, heart banging against ribs. Halfway across, the beam lurched again, dangling by a single rivet. She reached for the emergency crank but slipped. Wood slick with condensation offered no purchase. A hand grabbed her waist. James, rain-drenched, eyes fierce. "Hold the rail," he barked, then braced one boot against the frame, driving a fresh bolt with a hammer he'd tucked into his belt. Each strike sent shockwaves through the glass, but the beam grudgingly steadied. Below, Edwin guided workers to brace the trunk of the tallest orange tree, using it like a living column. Wind abruptly shifted, pelting the western windows with debris. The vents they left open now funneled rain inside. Lydia shouted from below, "They'll drown!" Edwin dashed to crank the vents shut, but slipped on a rolling orange. He fell hard against a crate, groaning as bone met wood. Margaret descended, knees shaking, and knelt. Edwin's ankle hung at an unnatural angle. Pain mottled his face. "Go," he hissed. "Save your harvest, Ellaway. Don't fuss over me." His laugh cracked. "Funny, I always thought I'd rescue you." James joined them, looping rope around a column to make a splint. Together they dragged Edwin clear of the aisles just as another gust buckled a pane near the roof. Rain sheeted through, but with vents sealed the pressure equalized. The frame shivered, then held. Hours later, the cyclone's eye drifted inland, wind dying in sudden hush. Sunlight filtered through rose glass onto chaos, broken branches, scattered fruit, puddles reflecting a sky finally exhausted. Yet most trees stood, most panes glimmered intact. Edwin reclined on stacked burlap, ankle-bound. He managed a rueful grin. "Turns out your wild dreams build stronger walls than all my polite schemes." Margaret squeezed his hand. "Turns out storms test more than timber." She looked to James, who surveyed the battered grove with cautious hope. He met her gaze, and relief burst between them like sunrise through storm clouds. 3 days later, crates left Bellehaven on a shining freight car, each stamped with a new brand. Roselight Citrus, grown under glass, forged in storms. Telegraphs from Atlanta and New York confirmed premium bids. Debt melted like morning mist. That night, the conservatory glowed with lanterns hung from unbroken beams. Bees slept deep in their hives. Citrus perfume mixed with the earthy scent of fresh soil piled at damaged roots. Margaret, in a dress the color of first light, clinked a glass of muscadine wine. "To mistakes endured," she toasted, eyes sweeping from Lydia's triumphant smile to the Colonel's proud stance, then to Edwin, propped on crutches, and finally to James, whose calloused hand steadied the lantern above her. "And to walls that bend," he added, "but never bar the heart." Outside the rose-tinted dome, whip-poor-wills called across the marsh, their notes carrying upward through open vents into a sky scrubbed clean by the passing gale, wide, wild, and waiting,